On a freezing winter morning, a man with unsteady steps, his breath reeking of alcohol, yanked harshly at a thin, trembling golden retriever. Her cries of pain echoed through the silent snow, while 6 tiny puppies trailed behind her, their fragile bodies shaking with cold and hunger. The man's grip tightened as she struggled to protect her little ones. The world seemed to turn away from this heartbreaking scene, but somewhere, a quiet prayer rose into the icy air. "Lord, are you watching? Who will save them?" Maggie, a retired art teacher, lived in a small seaside town where time seemed to move at its own leisurely pace. Her home was a cozy, weathered cottage perched on a hill, offering a stunning view of the rolling waves and the endless horizon. Inside, the house was filled with warmth and character, the walls adorned with Maggie's paintings, scenes of the ocean, colorful sunsets, and most prominently, portraits of Daisy, her golden retriever. Daisy was more than a pet to Maggie. She was a lifeline. After the sudden loss of her husband 5 years ago, Maggie had retreated into solitude, unsure of how to fill the void in her life. Daisy had been a gift from her daughter, who had hoped the playful pup would bring Maggie joy and purpose. And Daisy had done just that. From the moment Maggie laid eyes on Daisy as a wiggly, golden-furred puppy, she felt her heart begin to heal. Daisy had an uncanny ability to sense Maggie's moods. On days when the weight of grief felt unbearable, Daisy would nudge her hand with her cold, wet nose, her brown eyes filled with quiet understanding. Together, they found solace in their shared routines. Morning walks through the sleepy streets of town, afternoons spent in Maggie's art studio, and evenings by the fireplace, where Daisy would curl up at Maggie's feet. The seaside town where they lived was picturesque, with its cobblestone streets, whitewashed cottages, and a harbor filled with colorful fishing boats. The townsfolk often greeted Maggie with kind smiles and warm hellos, but they respected her quiet nature, understanding that she preferred the company of her dog and her art. One of Maggie's favorite rituals was her evening walks along the beach with Daisy. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of pink and gold, the two of them would wander along the shoreline. Daisy would bound ahead, chasing seagulls and splashing in the shallow waves, while Maggie strolled behind, soaking in the peacefulness of the moment. But one fateful evening, that tranquility was shattered. The day had started like any other, with Maggie preparing a simple breakfast, while Daisy waited patiently by her side, her tail thumping against the floor. The weather had been unusually warm for early autumn, and the sky was a brilliant blue. Maggie had spent the afternoon in her studio, painting a new seascape inspired by the morning light. By the time she and Daisy set out for their evening walk, the air had cooled, and a faint breeze carried the salty tang of the ocean. As they reached the beach, Maggie noticed the sky growing darker, heavy clouds rolling in from the horizon. The wind picked up, tugging at her cardigan and sending Daisy's fur rippling. "Looks like a storm's coming," Maggie murmured, glancing uneasily at the shifting sky. She debated turning back, but Daisy, as usual, was eager to explore. The golden retriever raced ahead, her golden coat gleaming against the darkening backdrop. Maggie followed, keeping a close eye on her, but the wind was growing stronger, and the waves were crashing louder against the shore. Before she could call Daisy back, the storm arrived in full force. The wind roared, whipping sand and sea spray into Maggie's face, and the once calm ocean churned violently. Rain began to fall in sheets, drenching Maggie within moments. She clutched Daisy's leash tightly, her knuckles white with the effort, but a powerful gust of wind tore it from her grasp. "Daisy!" Maggie screamed, her voice barely audible over the howling storm. She could see Daisy running ahead, her form a blur in the chaos. Maggie stumbled forward, her feet sinking into the wet sand, but the rain blurred her vision, and the wind pushed her back with relentless force. In the distance, she caught one last glimpse of Daisy, her golden coat disappearing into the shadows. And then, she was gone. Maggie searched desperately, her heart pounding with fear. She called Daisy's name over and over, her voice hoarse and cracking. She ventured as far as she could, battling the storm's fury, But the night swallowed her cries and the wind carried them away. By the time the storm finally subsided, Maggie was soaked, shivering, and utterly devastated. She spent the following days combing the beach, calling for Daisy, and leaving flyers at every corner of town. She visited the local animal shelters, spoke to fishermen who worked the nearby waters, and even reached out to neighboring towns. But no one had seen Daisy. It was as if the storm had taken her away completely. The loss of Daisy was a wound that refused to heal. Maggie returned to her quiet cottage, but it no longer felt like home. The house was silent without the sound of Daisy's paws padding across the floor or her tail thumping happily against the furniture. Maggie tried to fill the emptiness with her art, but even her paintings seemed lifeless without Daisy by her side. 3 years passed, but the pain of that night never left her. Maggie continued her evening walks along the beach, though now they felt more like a ritual of mourning. Each time she stepped onto the sand, she couldn't help but hope for a miracle, that Daisy would come bounding back to her, tail wagging, as if no time had passed. On some nights, she thought she heard Daisy's bark carried on the wind, or caught a glimpse of golden fur among the dunes, only to realize it was her mind playing tricks on her. Still, Maggie held on to a sliver of hope. She prayed often, her words quiet but sincere. Lord, if she's still out there, please keep her safe, and if it's your will, bring her back to me. 3 years had passed since the storm had taken Daisy away, but the memory of her golden retriever lingered in Maggie's heart like a shadow she could not shake. Winter had arrived in the small seaside town, covering everything in a blanket of snow and stillness. The holidays were approaching, but Maggie felt no joy in the festive lights or cheerful carols echoing through the town. Her days were quiet, her evenings lonelier still, and her walks along the beach were haunted by the absence of Daisy. On a particularly cold morning, the sky was overcast, and a biting wind cut through Maggie's wool coat as she drove into town to run a few errands. The streets were mostly empty, save for the occasional plume of smoke rising from chimneys and the crunch of snow beneath the tires of her old station wagon. As Maggie rounded a bend on the outskirts of town, something unusual caught her attention. By the side of the snow-covered road stood a man with a ragged coat and a bottle clutched in one hand. His movements were erratic, his breath visible in the icy air. Beside him, a golden retriever lay in the snow, her body trembling visibly. 6 small puppies huddled close to her for warmth, their tiny bodies shaking with the cold. Maggie slowed her car, her stomach tightening with unease. The man yanked roughly at the mother dog's collar, forcing her to stand despite her visible exhaustion. The puppies whimpered as they tried to keep up, stumbling in the deep snow. The scene sent a surge of anger and heartbreak through Maggie. She could not drive past. Pulling over to the side of the road, she stepped out of the car. The cold wind stung her face, but she barely noticed. Her focus was on the man and the dogs. "Excuse me," she called, her voice firm but steady. The man turned, his red bloodshot eyes meeting hers. "What do you want, lady?" he slurred, his breath reeking of alcohol. "That dog, those puppies, are freezing. What are you doing with them?" Maggie demanded, her voice trembling, though whether from the cold or fury she wasn't sure. "They're mine," the man spat, pulling the mother dog closer. She whimpered, lowering her head submissively. "What's it to you?" Maggie's heart ached as she looked at the golden retriever. She could see the exhaustion in the way her body sagged, the desperation in her eyes as she glanced protectively at her puppies. "They don't belong out here in the cold," Maggie said firmly. "You can't keep treating them like this." The man scoffed. "Unless you're buying, mind your own business." A mix of anger and determination surged within Maggie. She reached into her bag and pulled out her wallet. "Fine, I'll buy them. How much?" The man blinked, clearly surprised. He hesitated for a moment before muttering a number. Maggie didn't flinch as she handed over the money, her hands shaking slightly. "Take it," she said sharply. "Now leave them and go." Grumbling under his breath, the man pocketed the cash and trudged away, leaving the dogs behind. Maggie exhaled deeply, turning her attention to the golden retriever. The mother dog looked up at her cautiously, her tail giving the faintest wag. "It's okay now," Maggie murmured, crouching down. "You're safe." As Maggie knelt closer, her eyes fell on the dog's chest. Her breath caught in her throat. There, amidst the golden fur, was a small white star-shaped mark. A mark she knew all too well. Her hands trembled as she reached out, her voice barely a whisper. "Daisy, is it really you?" The dog's ears perked slightly at the sound of her name. She tilted her head, and for a moment their eyes met. Maggie felt a jolt of recognition, a flood of memories rushing back. The look in Daisy's eyes, filled with both weariness and hope, was unmistakable. It was her Daisy. Tears welled in Maggie's eyes as she carefully placed her hands on Daisy's head, her voice breaking. "Oh, Daisy, I thought I lost you forever." Daisy leaned into Maggie's touch, a soft whine escaping her as if she, too, couldn't believe they had found each other again. Maggie quickly turned her attention to the puppies, who were huddled together, their tiny bodies shivering. "Come on, little ones," she said softly, gathering them into her arms. "Let's get you all somewhere warm." She gently lifted Daisy into the back of her car, wrapping her in an old blanket she kept for emergencies. The puppies nestled against their mother, their cries softening as they felt her warmth. Maggie shut the door, climbed into the driver's seat, and took one last glance at the spot where she had found them. Her heart was heavy with what Daisy must have endured, but it was also filled with gratitude and relief. Against all odds, they had been reunited. As she drove back to her cottage, Maggie whispered a quiet prayer. "Thank you, Lord, for bringing her back to me. Please help me care for her and these little ones. They've been through so much." Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time in years, they were tears of joy. When she arrived home, Maggie carefully carried Daisy and the puppies inside, setting up a warm, cozy bed by the fireplace. As the fire crackled and the room filled with gentle warmth, Daisy lay down with her puppies, her body relaxing for the first time in what seemed like forever. Maggie sat beside her, running her fingers through Daisy's fur, her heart still racing from the events of the morning. "You're home now," Maggie whispered, "and I'll never let you go again." Back at her cozy cottage, Maggie quickly set to work creating a safe and warm environment for Daisy and her 6 puppies. The air was filled with the faint crackling of the fireplace, the scent of cedarwood mingling with the aroma of the stew Maggie had left simmering. For the first time in years, her home felt alive, bustling with energy and purpose. Daisy, exhausted from her ordeal, lay curled up in the soft bedding Maggie had prepared near the fire. Her golden fur, though matted and dulled, gleamed faintly in the flickering light. Maggie noticed the sharp protrusions of Daisy's ribs and the hollows around her eyes, signs of severe malnutrition. Her heart ached at the thought of what Daisy must have endured to protect her puppies. Yet, despite her frailty, Daisy's eyes shone with quiet gratitude and relief. Maggie knelt beside her, gently stroking her fur. "You're safe now, my girl," she whispered. "I'll take care of you and your babies. You've done so much already." The puppies, tiny bundles of golden fur, were nestled closely against their mother, their small bodies rising and falling as they slept. Maggie couldn't help but smile at their innocence, even after the harsh start they'd had in life. Each one had its own personality, something she noticed immediately as she cared for them. The first puppy, Sunny, was a ray of light, always the first to wag his tail or toddle over with a cheerful bark. He brought an infectious energy to the group. His golden coat shimmered like sunshine, and his playful antics made Maggie laugh out loud, something she hadn't done in a long time. Snowy, in contrast, was calm and serene, with a coat so pale it was almost cream-colored. She would sit quietly, watching her siblings with wide, curious eyes, often snuggling against Maggie's lap for comfort. Then there was Brave, a feisty little one with a slightly darker coat. He was always the first to explore, venturing out boldly, even when the others hesitated. Maggie admired his adventurous spirit and couldn't help but chuckle at his determination to climb over the smallest obstacles. Lucky, true to his name, seemed to carry a special kind of charm. He had a way of finding his way into Maggie's arms, his tiny tail wagging furiously whenever she held him. Maggie often whispered to him, "You're lucky to be here, little one, but I'm luckier to have found you." Coco, the gentle one, had the softest demeanor of them all. She would nuzzle her siblings when they fussed, as if trying to soothe them, and always seemed content just to be near her mother. Finally, there was Star, the smallest of the litter, with a faint white patch on her forehead that resembled a twinkling star. Star was quiet and shy, often hiding behind Daisy or her siblings, but her delicate nature only made Maggie love her more. Maggie quickly fell into a new routine, her days now revolving around the needs of Daisy and the puppies. Each morning, she would prepare warm, nourishing meals for Daisy, who ate hungrily, but always left enough for her pups. Maggie marveled at Daisy's resilience and the fierce love she showed for her babies. She set up a small play area in the corner of the living room, lining it with soft blankets and toys. The puppies, though wobbly on their tiny legs, began to explore the space, tumbling over one another in their excitement. Maggie would sit nearby, her sketchbook in hand, capturing their playful moments with delicate strokes of her pencil. Daisy, now growing stronger each day, would watch her puppies with a gentle pride. Maggie often caught her gazing at the pups with a look that seemed almost human, as if she understood the profound bond they all shared. The care Maggie poured into Daisy and her puppies was returned tenfold. The house, once quiet and lonely, was now filled with life. Small barks and squeals, the sound of tiny paws scampering across the wooden floor, and the warmth of a family that Maggie hadn't realized she needed. As the weeks passed, Daisy's health improved remarkably. Her coat regained its luster, her frame filled out, and the light in her eyes returned. Maggie felt a deep sense of fulfillment watching Daisy recover, knowing she had played a part in giving her friend a second chance. At the same time, Maggie found herself healing in ways she hadn't anticipated. The routine of caring for Daisy and the puppies gave her purpose, pulling her out of the sadness that had enveloped her for years. The simple joy of watching the puppies play, or seeing Daisy rest peacefully by the fire, reminded her of life's small but profound blessings. One evening, as the snow fell softly outside, Maggie sat by the fireplace, Daisy's head resting in her lap. The puppies were sprawled across their bedding, fast asleep after a long day of play. Maggie gently stroked Daisy's fur, her eyes welling up with tears, not of sorrow, but of gratitude. "You've given me so much more than I could ever give you," Maggie whispered. "Thank you for coming back to me." Daisy tilted her head, her brown eyes meeting Maggie's as if to say, "Thank you for not giving up on me." For Maggie, Daisy, and the puppies, life had become a series of small, beautiful moments. The once quiet house was now a haven of love and laughter, a place where broken hearts had begun to mend. Maggie knew that the road ahead would bring challenges, finding homes for the puppies, ensuring Daisy's continued recovery. But for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face them. In the warmth of the cottage, with Daisy by her side and 6 tiny miracles nestled close, Maggie understood that love had the power to heal even the deepest wounds. As the weeks turned into months, the puppies grew rapidly, their once wobbly legs now sturdy and confident. Maggie watched them with a mix of pride and sadness, knowing that the time had come to find homes for Daisy's little ones. Though the thought of parting with them tugged at her heart, she knew she couldn't keep all 6 puppies. What they needed most was the love and care of families who could give them the attention they deserved. Maggie began her search for the perfect homes with great care. She reached out to neighbors, friends, and even placed discreet notices at the local veterinary clinic and community center. But Maggie wasn't willing to hand the puppies over to just anyone. She wanted to ensure that each one would go to a family who would love them unconditionally. Every potential adopter was invited to Maggie's cottage to meet the puppies. Maggie greeted each visitor warmly but observed them closely. She paid attention to how they interacted with the puppies, looking for signs of patience, kindness, and genuine affection. One afternoon, a young couple arrived. their excitement barely contained as they crouched to play with the puppies. The woman, Sarah, carefully cradled Sonny, laughing as his tail wagged furiously. "He's perfect," Sarah said, her eyes shining. Maggie smiled but asked gently, "Do you have the time and commitment to care for him? He's full of energy and will need lots of love and attention." Sarah nodded earnestly. "We've been waiting for the right time to adopt a dog. We work from home, so we'll always be around to play with him and take him on adventures." Maggie felt a warmth in her chest as she watched Sonny snuggle into Sarah's arms. "I think he's found his match," she said softly. One by one, the puppies began to find their families. Snowy went to an older woman named Helen, who had recently lost her husband and was searching for companionship. Snowy's calm and gentle nature seemed to mirror Helen's quiet strength, and Maggie knew they would bring comfort to one another. Brave found his home with a young boy named Tommy, who beamed with excitement as Brave leaped into his arms. "He's like me," Tommy said proudly. "He's not afraid of anything." Maggie chuckled and said, "Just remember, he'll need a strong leader and lots of belly rubs." Lucky was adopted by a large family with 3 children who immediately adored him. Maggie watched as Lucky rolled onto his back, wagging his tail as the children giggled and petted him. She couldn't imagine a better fit for the playful pup. Coco, ever the gentle soul, went to a quiet couple who had recently retired. They spent hours sitting by the fire with Coco nestled between them, already treating her like a cherished family member. Finally, there was Star, the smallest and shyest of the litter. Maggie had worried about finding the right home for Star, as her timid nature made her less likely to stand out. But one day, a soft-spoken woman named Clara came to visit. Clara knelt down, holding out her hand patiently as Star peeked out from behind Daisy. "It's okay, sweet girl," Clara whispered, and to Maggie's surprise, Star slowly crept forward, nuzzling against Clara's hand. Maggie knew in that moment that Star had found her person. Before saying goodbye to each puppy, Maggie prepared a special gift for their new families. She printed out a photo of Daisy, her proud and resilient face framed by her golden fur, and wrote a heartfelt letter about Daisy's journey. In the letter, she shared the story of how Daisy had been found, her incredible strength as a mother, and the love that had brought them together. Maggie wrote, "These puppies are more than just pets. They are a testament to the power of love and resilience. By welcoming one of them into your home, you are continuing Daisy's story, a story of hope, survival, and new beginnings." As she handed over each puppy, Maggie shared a final moment with them, holding them close and whispering soft words of encouragement. "Be good, Sonny. You're going to bring so much happiness. Stay brave, Brave. You've got a big heart. Be gentle, Coco. They'll love you as much as I do." Each goodbye was bittersweet, but Maggie found solace in knowing that Daisy's legacy would live on in her puppies. With the puppies gone, the house felt quieter, but not empty. Daisy, now fully recovered and full of life, remained by Maggie's side. The two of them fell into a new routine, one that was calmer but just as fulfilling. Maggie often found herself reminiscing about the puppies, wondering what mischief Sonny was getting into, or how Snowy was helping Helen find peace. One evening, as Maggie and Daisy sat by the fire, Maggie reached for her sketchbook. She began to draw a portrait of Daisy surrounded by her puppies, their small forms nestled against her. The image brought a soft smile to Maggie's face. "You've done such a good job, Daisy," she said, her voice filled with pride. "Your little ones are out there, making the world a brighter place." Daisy seemed to understand, resting her head on Maggie's lap as the fire crackled softly. They had both been through so much, but in their shared journey, they had found something more profound than either could have imagined, a second chance at love, healing, and family. With the puppies now living happily in their new homes, life at Maggie's cottage settled into a tranquil rhythm. Daisy stayed by Maggie's side, her loyal presence a constant source of comfort and joy. Fully recovered and stronger than ever, Daisy had blossomed into a radiant symbol of resilience. Her golden coat gleamed in the sunlight as she accompanied Maggie on their daily walks by the beach. her tail wagging enthusiastically as the waves lapped at the shore. For Maggie, Daisy represented more than just a companion. She was living proof that even the most difficult chapters in life could lead to moments of profound beauty and renewal. Every time Maggie looked into Daisy's warm, soulful eyes, she felt a sense of gratitude that words could scarcely convey. Daisy's unwavering loyalty and gentle nature were a reminder of the extraordinary bond between humans and animals, a bond that could heal even the deepest wounds. One crisp autumn morning, Maggie was sipping her tea by the window when the mail arrived. Among the usual stack of bills and flyers was a thick envelope with a handwritten address. Maggie recognized the name immediately. It was from the family who had adopted Brave, the boldest and most adventurous of Daisy's puppies. Curious and excited, Maggie opened the envelope to find a letter and a photograph tucked inside. The photo captured a heartwarming scene. Brave was leaping joyfully through a grassy yard, his golden fur glowing in the sunlight. Two children, a boy and a girl, chased after him, their faces lit up with laughter. Brave's tongue lolled out happily, his energy radiating through the image. Maggie's hands trembled slightly as she read the accompanying letter. Dear Maggie, we hope this letter finds you well. Brave has become such an important part of our family. He brings so much laughter and energy into our home, and the kids absolutely adore him. Every morning, he waits by the door for them to wake up, and every evening, he curls up at their feet during bedtime stories. We can't thank you enough for trusting us with him. Knowing his story and the incredible strength of his mother, Daisy, has made him even more special to us. We thought you might like to see how happy he is. He truly has brought a little miracle into our lives. Asterisk. Warm regards, the Carters. Maggie wiped a tear from her cheek as she finished reading. She looked again at the photograph, her heart swelling with pride. Brave, the fearless little pup who had once tumbled over every obstacle, was now thriving in a home filled with love and laughter. It was more than she could have hoped for. The letter sparked a flood of emotions in Maggie. She thought about each of Daisy's puppies and the joy they must be bringing to their new families. She imagined Sunny bounding through the countryside with Sarah and her husband, Snowy snuggling on the couch with Helen during quiet afternoons, and Star gaining confidence under Clara's gentle care. Daisy's story, her strength, her love, her survival, had not only transformed Maggie's life, but had also touched the lives of countless others. Maggie realized that what began as a tragic chapter had blossomed into a tale of hope and redemption. By saving Daisy and her puppies, Maggie had unwittingly created ripples of kindness that extended far beyond her little cottage. Daisy, lying at Maggie's feet as she reread the letter, seemed to sense her thoughts. She lifted her head, her eyes meeting Maggie's with a knowing gaze. Maggie smiled, stroking Daisy's fur. You've done so much more than you'll ever realize, she whispered. You've brought love and light into so many hearts. A week later, Maggie received another surprise. A car pulled up to her driveway, and out stepped the Carter family, Brave bounding happily alongside them. The children ran up to Maggie, their cheeks flushed with excitement. We wanted to thank you in person, the little boy exclaimed. Brave rushed to Maggie, his tail wagging furiously as he jumped up to nuzzle her face. Oh, Brave, Maggie laughed, tears brimming in her eyes as she knelt to hug him. Daisy joined the reunion, her tail wagging as she greeted her son with soft whines and gentle nudges. The Carters stayed for tea, sharing stories of Brave's antics and the joy he had brought into their lives. Maggie felt her heart grow lighter with every word. By the time they left, she was overwhelmed with a deep sense of fulfillment. That evening, Maggie sat by the fire, Daisy resting contentedly at her side. The photograph of Brave now had a special place on the mantel, alongside Maggie's sketches of Daisy and the puppies. The house, though quieter without the rambunctious litter, felt fuller than ever before. Maggie realized that everyday miracles didn't always come in grand gestures or dramatic moments. Sometimes they were as simple as a puppy finding a loving home, a photograph capturing a moment of pure joy, or a second chance at life for a dog who had once been lost. She looked down at Daisy, who was now snoring softly and whispered, "We've come a long way, haven't we? You're my miracle, Daisy. And together, we've created something truly beautiful." The quiet days after Daisy's puppies had found their forever homes gave Maggie time to reflect on the profound journey she had experienced. Her bond with Daisy had not only brought healing and joy into her life, but also reminded her of the resilience and love that could be found even in the hardest of times. Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that her story with Daisy had a greater purpose, a way to help others who might be lost or in need, just as Daisy and her puppies once were. One morning, as Maggie sipped her tea by the window, she spotted a flyer pinned to the community board at the corner of her street. It was from the local animal rescue center, calling for volunteers to help care for abandoned pets. The center, located just outside town, had long been a refuge for stray and injured animals, but they were struggling with overcrowding and a shortage of hands. Maggie felt a tug at her heart. She had spent so much of her life grieving and living in solitude, but Daisy had shown her how powerful love and care could be. Perhaps this was her chance to give back. Later that day, Maggie visited the rescue center. The small building was filled with the sounds of barking dogs and meowing cats. Shelters lined the walls, and volunteers bustled about, feeding, cleaning, and comforting the animals. A kind-faced woman named Linda, the center's manager, welcomed Maggie warmly. "We're so glad to have you," she said. "The animals need all the love they can get." Maggie smiled, feeling both nervous and excited. She had never worked with so many animals at once, but as she stepped into the space, she felt a sense of belonging. Maggie quickly found her place at the rescue center. Her days there were filled with purpose, feeding the animals, cleaning their living spaces, and, most importantly, offering them the kindness and affection many had never known. She found herself drawn to the stories of the animals, each one unique and heartbreaking. There was Bella, a shy beagle who had been abandoned by her owners when they moved away, and Max, a scrappy terrier mix who had been rescued from a dangerous situation but still carried scars, both physical and emotional. Maggie spent hours sitting quietly by their kennels, letting them approach her on their own terms. Slowly but surely, she saw them begin to trust again. One day, as she worked, Linda asked Maggie about her story. Maggie shared Daisy's journey, the storm, the loss, the miraculous reunion, and the joy of finding homes for the puppies. Linda listened intently, her eyes softening with every word. "You should share this story with others," she said. "It's the kind of inspiration people need to hear." Encouraged by Linda's words, Maggie began to share Daisy's story with the community. She spoke at local schools, senior centers, and community events, bringing Daisy along as the star of the tale. Children's eyes lit up as they petted Daisy and heard about her brave journey, while adults wiped away tears as Maggie described the power of second chances and unconditional love. Maggie also began writing about her experiences, submitting articles to the town's newspaper and animal welfare newsletters. Her stories resonated deeply, inspiring others to adopt, foster, or volunteer at shelters. Soon, more and more people in the community were stepping up to help the animals in need. As Maggie immersed herself in her new role, she found a deep and lasting happiness. She no longer felt the loneliness that had weighed her down for so many years. Instead, her days were filled with the laughter of children meeting their first pets, the wagging tails of dogs finding new homes, and the quiet contentment of knowing she was making a difference. One evening, after a particularly busy day at the shelter, Maggie sat by the fireplace with Daisy at her side. She thought about how far they had both come. From the chaos of the storm to the quiet moments of healing, they had found their way together. And now, they were giving others the chance to find the same joy and hope. Looking down at Daisy, Maggie smiled and said, "You've changed my life, you know. And now, we're changing the lives of so many others." Daisy wagged her tail, her eyes reflecting the unspoken bond they shared. Through her work at the shelter, Maggie helped dozens of animals find loving homes. She saw firsthand how even the smallest acts of kindness could create ripples that spread far and wide. Every adoption, every story she shared, and every life she touched was a testament to the transformative power of love. Maggie's connection to the community deepened as well. Neighbors who once only waved from a distance now stopped to chat, share updates about the puppies they had adopted, or thank Maggie for her work. The cottage that had once been a place of solitude became a hub of warmth and connection. Maggie knew that her journey with Daisy had been a gift, a chance to rediscover herself and the joy of living. But she also understood that their story was part of something much larger. By helping others, Maggie had found her own healing, and by opening her heart, she had created a legacy of hope and love that would endure for years to come. As the snow fell softly outside, Maggie and Daisy sat together, watching the fire dance in the hearth. The world beyond their little cottage was filled with challenges, but also with infinite possibilities. And Maggie knew that as long as she and Daisy had each other, they would continue to make a difference, one paw print at a time. The first signs of spring arrived with a quiet beauty, transforming the once snow-covered town into a landscape of blooming flowers and soft green grass. The air was fresh and fragrant, carrying the promise of new beginnings. For Maggie, spring symbolized something deeper, a season of renewal not just for the world around her, but for her own heart and spirit. In the backyard of her cozy cottage, Maggie worked diligently to plant a new garden. Her hands, though weathered with age, moved skillfully through the rich soil as she planted rows of vibrant flowers and hardy vegetables. The garden, she decided, would be her tribute to the journey she had shared with Daisy. A space where life could thrive and grow, just as she and Daisy had. Daisy lay stretched out on the grass nearby, her golden coat shimmering under the warm sunlight. She watched Maggie with contentment, occasionally lifting her head to sniff the breeze or wag her tail at the sound of birds chirping overhead. Maggie often paused in her work to glance at Daisy, her heart swelling with gratitude. "You've been my rock, my brave girl," Maggie said aloud, her voice soft and filled with affection. Daisy perked her ears, her eyes meeting Maggie's as if to say, "And you've been mine." One sunny afternoon, Maggie heard the crunch of gravel as a car pulled into her driveway. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch, her heart lifting at the sight of her daughter Emily and her young granddaughter Sophie stepping out of the car. "Mama!" Emily called, her face lighting up with a smile. Sophie, a bubbly 6-year-old with blonde pigtails, ran toward Maggie, her small arms outstretched. Maggie knelt to embrace her, laughter bubbling from her as Sophie planted a kiss on her cheek. Daisy, curious and excited, trotted over to greet them, her tail wagging furiously. Sophie's eyes widened with delight. "Grandma, is this Daisy, the one you told me about?" "Yes, sweetheart," Maggie replied with a chuckle. "This is Daisy. She's very special." Sophie giggled as Daisy nuzzled her hand, her warm tongue licking Sophie's fingers. "She's so soft," Sophie exclaimed, gently stroking Daisy's fur. The bond between them was immediate, and soon the two were playing together in the yard, Daisy chasing after the small ball Sophie threw with all her might. Inside the cottage, Maggie prepared tea and homemade biscuits, while Emily helped set the table. The two women chatted about life, catching up on the time they had missed. Emily marveled at the changes in her mother, how vibrant and full of life she seemed compared to the quiet, reserved woman she had been just a few years ago. "This garden, the shelter work, Daisy, it's all brought you back, hasn't it?" Emily asked, her voice tinged with emotion. Maggie smiled, her eyes misty as she glanced out the window at Sophie and Daisy playing in the yard. "It has. I didn't realize how much I'd closed myself off after your father passed. Daisy opened my heart again, and through her, I've found so much more to live for." Emily reached out and squeezed Maggie's hand. "I'm so proud of you, Mama, and I know Dad would be too." As the afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm golden hue across the yard, Maggie joined Sophie and Daisy outside. Together they played in the garden, laughter ringing through the air as Daisy chased Sophie around the flower beds. Maggie couldn't help but marvel at how much love and happiness filled her life now. Sitting on the porch later, with Sophie snuggled up beside her and Daisy resting at her feet. Maggie reflected on the long and winding journey that had brought her to this moment. From the pain of losing Daisy in the storm to the miracle of their reunion, every step had led her closer to this newfound peace. The garden around her, now bursting with the beginnings of life, felt like a perfect symbol of her story. Just as the flowers had pushed through the cold, hard ground to bloom in the spring sunlight, Maggie had found her way out of the darkness to embrace the light once more. That night, as the cottage grew quiet, Maggie sat by the fire with Daisy curled up beside her. She reached for her journal, a habit she had picked up during her time at the shelter, and began to write. This spring, I feel more alive than I have in years. Daisy, my brave and loyal companion, has taught me the true meaning of resilience and love. Through her, I've rediscovered the joy of connection, the power of kindness, and the beauty of starting over. Our story is not just about survival, it's about thriving, even after the storm. Maggie closed the journal and looked at Daisy, who blinked up at her sleepily. We did it, Daisy, she whispered. We've come full circle. Daisy let out a soft sigh, her tail thumping lightly against the floor as if to agree. Maggie leaned back, her heart full and her spirit renewed, ready to embrace whatever the next chapter of life might bring. As spring continued to bloom around them, Maggie's garden became a sanctuary, not just for her and Daisy, but for friends, family, and neighbors who came to visit. It stood as a testament to the healing power of love, the joy of second chances, and the everyday miracles that could be found when one chose to open their heart. Maggie's journey with Daisy was more than a story of loss and reunion. It was a story of hope, resilience, and the extraordinary bond between humans and animals. And as the seasons turned and life continued, Maggie knew that the best was still yet to come.